Hello and welcome. I want you to consider a pretty wild idea for a second. What if the rules that govern our societies, morality, justice, order, what if they aren't just things we humans invent and argue about? What if they are fundamental laws of the universe, just like gravity, waiting to be discovered? So, how are we going to wrap our heads around something that big? Well, here's our roadmap. First, we'll look at why our current systems feel so chaotic. Then, we'll jump into this mind-bending concept of a physics of morality. From there, we'll see how it affects you personally, test the theory against history, and finally, go searching for what this theory calls the master code.
Okay, let's start with a feeling that I think we can all recognize. Things feel off, right? It seems like no matter how much technology we develop, our societies are getting more unstable, not less. We're in what you could call a governance vacuum, and we're going to explore why that is.
And this quote just hits the nail on the head. We're trapped in this endless borrow, spend, consume loop. It feels like we're all running on a giant hamster wheel that's just designed to exhaust itself and everything around it. And you can see the results everywhere, from our economies to the environment. This really is the great paradox of our time, isn't it? We have more data, more connectivity, more raw power than any other time in history. And yet, what do our systems often produce? Addiction, division, and one crisis after another. So you have to ask, maybe the problem isn't our tools. Maybe the problem is the operating system we're running them on. Right, so if our civilizational operating system is broken, what's the alternative? This is where we take a leap. We're going to look at this idea of a physics of morality, which suggests there's an actual equation, like a law of nature, that explains how civilizations generate lasting value, or collapse into dust. Okay, just look at this for a second. On the left, you've got maybe the most famous equation in science, E equals mc squared. And on the right, you've got his proposed twin for governance, E equals ud squared. Now, the claim here is absolutely massive, that just like there's a law for turning matter into physical energy, there's a parallel law for turning a society's resources into real, lasting moral energy. So, let's break this new equation down. First up is U for universe or utility. This is the mass part of the equation. It's all the finite stuff, the raw fuel a civilization has to work with. We're talking money, resources, technology, data, even our own time and physical bodies. Now for the D. It stands for Deen, which basically means the established order or the system you live by. In this equation, it acts like a moral constant, kind of like the speed of light. It's the set of rules, the ethical protocol you use to process all that you, all your resources. And notice it's squared. That's key. It means even a tiny improvement in your moral framework yields an exponential increase in your output. So what does all this produce? That's E for essence. And this isn't profit or GDP or power. Essence is the eternal value that gets created. Things like wisdom, justice, community, beauty. According to this theory, it's the only thing that actually lasts after all the buildings and the money are gone. And you can think of this whole process like a governance reactor. It works like this. First, your raw resources, you, go in as fuel. Second, that fuel gets processed through your moral code, D squared. Third, the steward, the collective self of the society, decides what to do. And fourth, the output is one of two things. It's either eternal value, essence, or it's wasted energy, chaos, and decay, entropy. There's no in between. Okay, so we've been talking about these giant civilizational forces, but what does any of this have to do with you personally? Well, this is where we zoom in and look at what the theory calls your reality rendering engine, because apparently this operating system doesn't just run societies, it runs your perception of reality itself. Now, this is a wild idea. The theory says you don't actually see objective reality. What you see is the truth passed through your own internal filter. Your beliefs, your values, your stage of development, they all act together to render the world you experience. So in a way, we're all walking around in our own custom-generated simulation of the world. The theory has a fancy name for this, the TQG-CFE. But an easier way to think about it is like the GPU, the graphics card for your consciousness. It's the hardware inside you that renders your world. And this explains everything, right? It's why two people can look at the exact same event and see two completely different realities. They're just using different graphics cards. And here's what that looks like in practice. Let's say you're running the Faro filter. Your internal GPU is corrupted. You see a crisis and perceive it as a threat to your power. Your world is rendered as a dark place of scarcity and paranoia. But if you have the profit filter, a transparent, high-level filter, you see that same crisis and perceive it as a test, an opportunity. Your world is rendered as one of abundance and divine purpose. Same data, totally different worlds.
Okay, I know, this is a fascinating theory, but is there any actual evidence for it? For that, we have to look back and examine history's operating system. Because if this physics of morality is real, it shouldn't be new. We should be able to see its code running in the background of every civilization that has ever existed.
And this table just lays the pattern out so clearly. You have the Pharaoh model, tons of resources, a high U, but a very low D, a system based on ego and tyranny. The outcome every single time? Zero essence, zero lasting value. Then you have the prophet model, often starting with very little, a low U, but a sky-high commitment to moral protocol, a high D. The outcome? An infinite legacy that changes the world forever. And you can see this high U, low D pattern of collapse everywhere. Ancient Egypt, the Roman Empire, they had immense wealth and power, but their systems were corrupt and they eventually crumbled. You can even see it in modern examples, like the corporate greed of Enron or the systemic failure of the 2008 financial crisis. They all leave behind ruins and wreckage, but no sustainable positive legacy.
Which brings us to the final and honestly, the most profound part of this whole idea. We're at the point where we have to talk about discovering the master code. And this requires a fundamental shift in how we think about building a better world. And here it is, the core idea. These laws of governance, they aren't things we invent in a committee meeting. They're fundamental forces that we discover. Think about it. Newton didn't invent gravity, he recognized a pattern that was always there and gave it a name. In the same way, this theory says E equals UD squared wasn't just made up, it's simply the formula that describes a pattern we can see again and again throughout all of human history. We just finally developed the tools to see it. So I'll leave you with this final massive question. If the laws of physics, like E equals mc squared, and the patterns that govern civilizations, like E equals UD squared, show this perfect isomorphic consistency across thousands of years, then could it be that they both come from the exact same self-executing system? Is there a single source code running the entire universe, for both matter and for meaning? It's a staggering thought. Thanks for joining me on this exploration.